Hey there, and welcome. So, Side Effects is holding a new Houdini art challenge called Mardini, which is starting on the 1st of March. The idea of it is to create an artwork in Houdini based on a daily prompt. That prompt is basically just a theme to base your artwork around. It's open to anyone who would like to enter, and if you do enter, it doesn't have to be every day. Last year, there were prizes for Best Daily, Best Weekly, Best Collection, Best Overall Artwork, and for entering every day. So, as you may know, I won Best Collection in last year's Who Lie Art Challenge, and I've decided to do a daily review video for each day's entries. I'm going to be talking about the winning entries, what makes them so good, and then I'm also going to be talking about some of the other entries. I'll go over what I like about them, what I think could maybe be changed, and how they could have been winning entries in my opinion. So if you'd like me to review your entry, feel free to tag me on Instagram at 9_between. So with all of that comes a bit of a disclaimer. Everything that I'm saying here is my own opinion. It doesn't make it right or wrong. I'm just trying to give a critique that the artist can work from and hopefully something that you can learn from as well. I'm not trying to make fun of or insult or belittle any of the artists. I'm merely just trying to give some feedback in an entertaining way. So let's get straight into it. So in the images category, in third place, we have this entry by GT3D 2019. And this is for the topic of stone. What they have here is brilliant. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, their level of detail is lovely. They have lots of variation. You have the cracks in here, you have the color variation, so yellow over here and darker at the base. You also have variation in the actual texture. Over here, it's more towards cement. Over here, it looks more like marble. And over here, it looks more like slate. So these sort of textural differences that are blended together over here with these, I assume, noise patterns are excellent. The other thing that I really like about this is that the detail actually has an idea behind it. If you check it out, all of this over here is actually Vex code. And over here, they have binary, zeros and ones. And up at the top, they have sort of hieroglyphics made of the base geometry. You can see that that's Flippy over there, and that's Tommy, and I can't really figure out the rest. So there's a lot of fun things to look at. Yeah, you can see like at PT num equals 360, angle equals radians. I think that that's awesome. Lovely touch. The only thing that I might suggest is a slight change to lighting, but it's so minor. Like, I think that this is great already. The sort of light that they have on the side is great, but what they could maybe do is darken the side a bit more. But once again, a minor technicality. I think it's great. Next, we have this entry from Oscar, and Oscar keeps winning, and I still don't know how to pronounce his name. Still not sure if it's Uska or Oscar, but we have this great entry by them. So this over here has a few intricacies that make it great to look at. First of all, there's the sort of light bloom that comes in from this corner. This adds to the realism of the shot. The next thing that I think is great is the actual pedestal that the whole setup is on. It sort of makes the environment feel more fleshed out. They also use an HDRI that matches the environment. So this looks like somebody's workshop or something, and this is maybe a piece that they're working on. I think that it's a smart choice to use this environment over here, this HDRI. And then they blur it out slightly so that you can't get all the detail, and you can't really figure out that that's not real geometry. That's just an image. The actual setup that they have going here is great. I love that they took the time to have this sort of attention to detail where they have displacement at the base. They have this inside area, so everything contained inside of here is this smooth sort of marble. And then everything outside is this, I'm not even sure what type of stone this is. I guess it's like marble. I'm not sure. But yeah, this is a very interesting image to look at. And they have great variation in their lighting. They have shallow depth of field. It's a very clean render. There's not much noise. Everything about this is high quality. They clearly know what they're doing. And so yeah, I like this entry a lot. And in first place, we have this entry by Adrian Lambert. So this entry 100% deserves to be a winning entry. There's a lot of realistic detailing that they've done here. If you take a look at all of these rocks, I don't see any sort of tiling. I don't see any sort of repetition, and there's no intersection between the rocks. They've done a great job of making this realistic, right? They've ensured that everything fits together perfectly, and that's Awesome. I'm not actually sure how they did this, so I appreciate the fact that there's so much complexity in such a seemingly simple shot. They have a great level of variation between the stones. As you can see, even this one over here is more of a bluish gray rock. This one over here is more of a yellowish sort of brushed rock. Then they have the image of the wolf, or I assume it's a wolf. Looks like a wolf to me. And then they have this difference in the stone. So conceptually, this is awesome. They've also made sure to have some detail in the background. Their scaling for all of this looks correct. And overall, this looks quite realistic. So this is sort of an afternoon lighting, which looks incredible with the shot. And overall, I have nothing bad to say about this. Brilliant, brilliant work by Adrian Lambert. In third place in the animation category, we have this entry by Beazle. And this is almost a perfect shot. So I say almost for a few minor reasons, but looking at this, it does look good. So they have great lighting on their setup. There's a great level of detail with the sort of debris that falls as this breaks. And of course, the same things that I always mention about lighting. They have this light source that brings attention to the center. They have a great sort of edge light, so a highlighting light. The background lighting is very uniform, and they've made sure that the background has a good taper off so that there's no harsh edge. All of that ensures that your lighting setup and environment looks great and your attention is drawn towards the center. They also have some variation in the background. All of that's things that I've mentioned before. Something that I haven't mentioned before has to do with their actual RBD network. So if you take a look over here, there's pieces that kind of get stuck, like that over there, it gets caught. There are a couple of reasons why this could happen. Sometimes that issue is caused by your geometry not matching the collider, but this doesn't seem to be an issue because all of the small pieces that are falling to the ground seem to be working okay. An initial intersection between pieces of rock can cause this. Overlapping name attributes can cause this, I believe. So there are a few things. So I'm not sure why that happened in this case, but it is the only weakness of this entry. Texturing, lighting, composition, detail, everything is brilliant. The only issue seems to be these weird pieces of rock that get caught as they're falling. But overall, great entry by Beazle. Not much wrong with it. In second place for the animation category, we have this by Hans Palacios. And Donkeys Strike Again. We have this where the donkey turns to stone. They've textured this in a somewhat realistic manner, right? This would actually look pretty decent if it was lit up in a sort of realistic setting with a realistic background. But they've kept it comical by going for this bright blue background, and that's a smart choice because this is still a very comical shot, very comical and light-hearted, so it's a good idea to have the blue background with the more realistically textured foreground. They also have this interesting composition where there's these 3 donkeys in different poses, and you don't know what you're going to see on the last one. So this is much better than having a shot where all pedestals are sort of shown immediately, because then you already know what's coming. But in this case, you have an expectation, and then when it actually occurs, it's not what you were expecting. So they have this sort of disintegration thing. This looks like a primitive node that they used, where you scale it down as a sort of growth attribute moves along. But all of those primitives are getting scaled down as far as I can tell, and then it turns to stone. So you reveal the geometry underneath that stone, and it falls into place, and they show the full sequence. So yeah, there's a lot of great things about this. The lighting, the texturing, the concept. Nice entry. Very light and fun, as are Hans Palacios' entries, so great work. On to the first place entry, and this entry is, well, it's by me. This is my entry. And then one last stone. Nope. Because I made this, I can tell you exactly what I like and dislike about it, what I was happy with, what I would have liked to have changed. So this is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. No, I'm kidding. I'm not that narcissistic. So a couple of things that I was very happy with were actually things like lighting and texturing. This surface over here, texture, it's kind of muted, a little bit of displacement. The other thing I was quite happy with was my lighting setup. I like this sort of lighting. I usually talk about this type of thing. There was an entry, I think it was on day 3, where they had this sort of lighting that comes in, and it's reminiscent of maybe a window. And the way I did this is I just put a piece of geometry in front of the light source, So I was also happy with the texturing on all of these rocks. I think that it looks fairly realistic and decent. I just used various noise patterns to texture these rocks. The one thing that I'm not happy about with these rocks is the actual dynamics. So they're a little bit weightless, and you notice this especially on the slightly bigger rocks, like that one that just gets pushed aside. The weight definitely feels a little bit off with these rocks. Also, their movement is a bit jittery at times. As for the actual egg, so I was happy with the way that the yolk looked. Just to give you an idea of how this was done, it was RBD fracture with glue constraints, and then when it impacts, I have weaker glue constraints running around the circumference, sort of, so that it breaks where I want it. The issue I had with it was that these egg whites are way too turbulent when they come out, and you can see that it actually sort of leaks through before the actual crack happens, and that's an issue with my dynamics that I just couldn't get right. So yeah, that's one issue with it. The other issue is if we keep going, it's way too turbulent for the actual impact. This isn't realistic. It wouldn't look like this. It would be a lot smoother. But then again, the egg also wouldn't crack the way that this egg cracks. I've watched some reference material. It wouldn't sort of hit and then slowly break open. It would almost shatter open. Eggs have a very fragile shell, but they kind of held together by a membrane. I achieved that with some soft constraints, which eventually causes issues. You end up with little floating pieces that don't really match. From here on, I quite like it. I think that the egg white is maybe a bit too runny, but hey, it could be an old egg, who knows? So the order that I did it in was the RBD first, the egg second, and the whites third. They aren't all running sort of congruently. It's basically just the shell affects the yolk and the shell affect the white. And there's no sort of two-way interaction where like the white affects the yolk, because it's not necessary, and that's quite a complicated thing to do. Basically, I was very happy with the texturing and the lighting, and I wasn't so happy with the actual dynamics. Also, I would have liked to have had a cleaner render. It lacks a bit of detail, looks kind of fuzzy, there's quite a bit of noise in the shadows. Some of that is from grain that I added. But yeah, I'll go into this at the end of the video if you're interested, because I do have the setup so I can explain it to you. I'll also drop a link down below so that you can download this and take a look at how I did it. There's a lot of workarounds that I did, so maybe don't follow exactly how I did it, but you can get an idea of how I did it. So yeah, I'll give you some of the tricks and tips that I used to make this at the end of the video. So you can skip ahead to that if you want, or just wait for it. But yeah, I'll go through all of that at the end. Time for Mardini review. First things first. Boop. So the first one that I'm looking at is by Suzu8, and it's a lovely entry for a couple of reasons. So of course the stone up front with the Houdini logo is very well done. They have a bit of fine scratches on here, which is an excellent touch. It adds a bit of detail and a bit of realism. Their lighting is great. They have this harsh light over here, but it's not too distracting. It makes it feel like this is a very bright day, so under some harsh conditions. You also have this sort of light that catches this side over here. All of that is great. The background, they've made sure that they've textured it well, so there seems to be some level of displacement and the light catches on it in different ways. They have very good contrast between the background and the central focal point. So overall, it's a great entry. I think the only thing that they could maybe change is to slightly decrease the brightness on this background and to really make use of the sort of detail that they have in the background by angling their light so it hits the edges. So if you're angling your light so that it picks up on these edges, then you're getting the most bang for your buck with this detail. But a couple of other things that I like. The composition is off center, and this is especially good because there is detail in the background. So once you've looked at the main focal point, your eye can linger and you can appreciate all of the extra detail. So a great entry by Suzu8. So here we have this entry by NH Pratyusha. Sorry, I hope I said that right. I know that I said your name the other day and I may have gotten it wrong, so I apologize. But this entry I think is lovely as well. And a couple of things that I love about this is firstly the background. So this level of detail to add to the background is brilliant. It's a lovely touch to have because these four elements need a sort of muted background, but they do need a background and they don't really fit into a sort of wild environment. Your options are basically for them to kind of sit on a table or on a rock, or in this case on the sort of cotton, or might even be some sort of like burlap or something, but it's a great textural quality to this. The benefit of doing this is that you end up with great light variation. As you can see, this light over here is different to the sort of dips in lighting over here. So what this does for you is it adds a lot of detail that's fairly cheap, that isn't distracting. That's the important part. It doesn't distract you from the main elements of the shot. Now, as for these 4 rocks, I actually want to reference an entry from last year because there was a great entry that was similar. And it is this one over here by Alex NX. And this was a great entry, largely because of the detail. And so I think the topic was noise for this day. Yeah, so the topic was noise. And so he used various noise patterns to create these. Now, I'd like to draw some comparisons between these rocks and the ones done over here. So one main thing to note is that Alex's rocks have a bit of depth to them. I believe that he may have used transmission or the like so that there's a bit of depth to them. It almost looks like there's things suspended in them. So there's variation in the texture. That's one thing that's different from this over here. So I would recommend trying something perhaps where you turn this area over here into a bit of a transmission. Now, how would you do that? So if this is a texture, what you could maybe do is you turn it into a sort of grayscale, and then you use it to drive the transmission intensity. So you can have all of these areas acting more like glass, and these areas acting more like diffuse. What that'll do is add some depth to these, because they do look quite flat, but they're very close to being great. Same thing over here, you make this more of a transmissive material, but the rest of it you make diffuse. And so there's a few minor things, right? But I think that there's a great opportunity here because you have this entry from Alex last year from which you can sort of draw comparison. Because this entry's quality is close to this level, save for a few minor adjustments. So I would recommend for NH Pratyusha to take a look at Alex's entry from last year. You can find it in the Houdini Daily Challenge. It was the day 28 entry, 2nd place. So yeah, hopefully that helps you out. Maybe you can learn a thing or two from Alex's entry, but this was a great attempt. Keep up the awesome work. So yeah. So this entry from Stephen Kang I wanted to talk about because it's a very interesting take. So he has basically a vellum stone and an incredible amount of detail. This detail is great. This sort of displacement that he has on here, it all looks brilliant. The other thing that I find interesting is the sort of white on white with the orange breaking it. Everything about this is great. This looks like it could be an ad. Ike. Whatever, just do it. It looks like it could be an ad. There's a lot of great detail to this. The render quality is insane. So I guess special mention to Stephen Kang. Wonderful entry. So this entry from Mardini is wonderful. The reason that I wanted to bring this one up is because the texturing on this is insane. They have a wonderful level of detail on this. There's these sort of glittery pieces inside. They have good geometry. There's a sort of concave area over there. This faceted look allows the light to catch it in interesting ways. And if you even take a look at around these frames over here, you can see that when the light hits it over there, there is a variation in the roughness, and that gives you some incredible detail on that side. So for that reason, this is maybe my special mention entry, the one that I think has the potential to be a top 3 entry. So yeah, awesome work by Mardini Maj. Sorry. I don't know how to say it. But yeah, it's beautiful. Really, really beautiful. Another one I want to talk about quickly is this one by Karan Effects. And it's a brilliant looking shot. There's a few things that I want to mention. So your simulation looks good, right? Your texturing is also great. What's letting this down is your lighting. It's a very uniform light. And so you have the sort of issue where nothing is really in focus, but you actually want these two to be in focus. So if I could maybe suggest something, I would say add a light sort of over here, which hits this edge of the rock just like that, and sort of the top edge and face like that. That'll draw attention to this area over here. You can also sort of come in a bit with your camera. These rocks could be a little bit closer in, so maybe rotate your camera in this way. So you have less of this side and a little bit more of this side. The other thing I would maybe suggest is a slight shallow depth of field or something, so that these in the background are out of focus. And your attention is once again drawn more to this, which is the focal point. So yeah, texturing and everything, great, man. Like, even your dynamics are good. I'd say the only thing here is the lighting. So hopefully that helps you. That's just my opinion. But yeah, I think it's a cool entry. So I want to talk about this one from Zed. and I don't want to say anything bad about this one because I said that his last entry looked like butt cheeks. And as far as reviews go, that's maybe not my finest. But this that he has here, there's a few things that I appreciate about this. Firstly, it's the aspect ratio. I think it's very cool that he's gone for this extremely extended aspect ratio as opposed to 16:9 or 4:3 or any of the common resolutions. He's gone for what seems to be double 16:9. So this looks like, I don't know, whatever that is, 32:9 if that's even a resolution. The other thing is this sort of area over here that's out of focus looks great. Color scheme is very interesting. This actually has a very cinematic look to it, which I love. Nice focal shift, very interesting doing that focal shift like that from here to there. I'd say that the only reason that this kind of falls short is because you're not really getting the faceting of these. It might be better to have some sort of faceting so that the light interacts with the edges. So as opposed to having this very minor bump, have a sort of faceted edge, right? So these are more like gemstones. That might help because then you'll have sort of lighting that hits these edges and brings a lot of attention to the shape. Right now, these don't exactly feel like stones, but you have such a brilliant setup going here and such good rendering that it's a bit of a shame that it falls short. Like this one over here, you can sort of see the faceting, which is nice. But on the rest of them, they look maybe a bit too soft. And so that would be my one piece of advice about this entry. Maybe make some adjustments to the actual geometry and you may have a winning entry. But yeah, keep it up. Like, your work's getting better by the day. It's awesome to see the progress that you're making. Like, this is one of the more cinematic shots that you've done. If you're familiar with like Man vs. Machine, this with some tweaking could be something that they would release. I'm not even joking. You make some adjustments like doing volumetrics, darkening this inside area, having a bit of sort of dust particles in the air, a bit more variation in the color. All of those things would lend themselves to an insane artwork. So this is close to being at that level. Love it. Yeah, keep it up. Okay, so here we go. I have my setup over here. So I'm going to show you a couple of things about this. Firstly, to get the lighting that I was so happy about, I would like to show you that. So let me just hide all of these things. Okay, so let's take a look at the lighting. I'll bring it up on my second monitor. I think you should be able to see this. Yeah, so as you can see, this light over here, which I'm pointing at now, is what's causing this extremely bright light over here, right? All of this that you're seeing over here is caused by that light. Now, that's a bit much, right? It's a little bit hectic. So you drop a bit of a piece of geometry in front of it and block most of the light. So I just have this sort of grid. What that does is it now gives you these nice streaks of light. You have these bright areas, right, that kind of shine through. And then some other things about the lighting is that you also have this one over here, which is more of a blue light. And you have the HDRI. So I'll single out each light so that you can see what each one does for the shot. So no lights. Then you switch on the HDRI, gives a little bit of detail to everything, not much, right? It's just there to give that underlying diffused light. Then you add the background light, so the slightly blue light, right? That just gives you a bit of interest as it leads off into the distance. It also catches all these edges. This is something that I mention a lot. So over here, it's catching all of these little edges. Finally, the light that goes behind that piece of geometry gives you that sort of light. Right, that very bright sort of streak of light. And in the earlier shot, this looks much better. This is mostly because of the camera move that I have. So this camera, so that one over there, you can see that it moves very slightly over the course of the shot, right? It sort of drops its angle. That's because I'm focusing on different things as the shot progresses. That's just one thing about camera move and lighting, as well as the texturing on the ground. These over here, these rocks, I have a fairly basic RBD setup over here. So I just make some rocks, auto UV them. So firstly, you auto UV the rock, and then you copy them to points. Using an attribute VOP, you apply some noise so that they're all slightly different shapes. That's super basic. You just unified static noise into a displace along normals. Once I had that, I kind of flattened them. I didn't want them to be so round because I needed them to come to rest. And so they need a sort of flat face to lie on. Attribute blurred them because I didn't want them to be too sharp. I wanted them all to sort of resemble an egg, and you can quick shade to see the UVs on all of them. Cool. So the next thing that I have is this I at drop F equals a random value between 1 and 120. So I'm just saying give me a random float between 1 and 120, round it to an integer, cast it to an integer, put it into this drop F attribute. I use that to activate the rocks, so that becomes important a bit later. Over here I'm just basically positioning the rocks. I want them to fall from different heights and different angles. All of that. Delete the ID attribute so that they no longer have unique identifiers because I duplicated them over and so their IDs sort of conflicted. I didn't want that to happen, so I just deleted it. RBD configure. I gave them their drop F attribute and class so that I know which ones are sort of connected together. Because I use class, and this comes from this connectivity attribute over here, I use class a bit later to give them random colors. So I can actually show you this. If you just go over here, connectivity into color, and you do like random from attribute, and the attribute that you put in is class, you can see they each get a different random color. That's very nice for when you're finished with the simulation and you want to add random colors to all of your rocks. So connectivity just makes each connected rock a different class, and then you can use that later. So I attach class and drop F. Drop F I use inside of here. I'll just dive inside and show you. Super simple. In a popper angle, I just say if the frame is greater than drop F, make the rock active. So then the rock will fall. Otherwise, the rock's inactive, so it doesn't fall. Then that goes into an RBD network, and over time, they fall sort of one at a time, right? As soon as their drop F attribute is rich, they fall. So unpack them, give them a trail node for velocity. All of this, nothing really interesting here. I generate random colors for them over here. And yeah, so that's all that really goes into this. I also choose one that I like to use as an egg. So that one is here somewhere. Yeah, so I like the way that this one looks. So I just blast everything but that one. So I time shift them all into place, choose the one that I like, and then transform it to its origin, export it as egg. That's my egg. Then the grid is just a grid. That's all the floor is. This over here, all of this detail is just from texturing. The yoke is a bit of a vellum simulation. It's once again pretty simple. So I just have a sphere. I time shift to the point, let me just hide everything else, where the egg is about to impact, right? So I only run my vellum simulation from here. You don't want to run extra vellum simulations and stuff because it gives it more time to sort of freak out and break. So only do it from where it's necessary, which is just before when the egg breaks. I give it some cloth and I give it some pressure, super basic vellum solver, and then as it, why is that not working? Hello. Oh, yeah, right. So from frame 314 is where it impacts. So as you can see, that actually lines up with this over here. So now impact at 314, right? That's only when I start my simulation. You can see over here, start frame 314. So at 314, the yoke is created. The vellum begins to run from there. So as you may notice, the egg starts a lot smaller than it actually ends up. That's because I couldn't really fit the whole egg in here without it having some sort of intersection issues. The other thing is that it was intersecting with some of these inside faces, right? Because of the way that this egg breaks, right? So as you can see, I'll just let it break. There's a lot of these inside shards. So if I go over here, you know, there's a couple more of these small pieces. And I had to remove some of them for the egg yolk because it would intersect with them and my vellum would just break down. So you had to remove some of them. Inside the vellum solver, I just slightly increase the rest length over here. I also wanted to art direct this a little bit better. So I gave it some speed. So it kind of pulls the yoke towards us. So it comes a little bit towards the camera and to the right. Because it was naturally actually just falling down towards the back. And that's not great. That's not what I want. It would fall behind this rock over here. I want it to fall to the front. So I faked that by giving it some velocity. That just gives us this little egg over here that falls out. What I wasn't too happy about was that it has this sort of dimple, right? And I thought that didn't look great. So what I did was I edited it. I used an edit node. I pulled it out, sort of smoothed it off, and then used the blend shape. So I keyframe this blend shape so that once it stops moving, it blends into this position, right? That's all a blend shape does. It just switches from this position to this position over time. It blends between them. So that's a pretty nice technique. And then I had my egg. Cool, done. The actual egg fracture to get all of this. This was pretty tricky. So I just take that egg that I bring in, I poly extrude it, I fracture it. So once the egg's fractured, I decided that I want to weaken some of the constraints so I can control where it breaks. So everywhere else, this has a, let's see, this has, a primary strength of 1000. So these constraints are fairly strong. They won't just break. It also has soft constraints when broken. So once it breaks, there'll be constraints that still kind of hold things in place, but they're not hard constraints, right? They sort of move around and shift. And so, what I do is I weaken all of those constraints over there so that I can control where the egg cracks. Once I do that, this is where it got complicated. I went inside of this mess of nodes because someone, if anyone knows if I'm doing this wrong, please tell me. But I needed to access the constraints network of this bullet solver. Now, when you're doing this in, a DOP network, it's easy because it's just the stuff on the right-hand side and you can just play around with it. But this is made up of a lot of things. And so I had to go in here and find the DOP net. So this over here, it's down here. And then I had to go and find my constraints. So over here, you can see this is the constraint solver. And inside of here is where I had to add a little bit of code. So I just said that if the length of the soft constraint is greater than this, then remove the soft constraint. All that means is that, let me see if I can show you. So I'll show you with an exploded view maybe. So say that this egg is together and it starts breaking, right? Now, if it's at this point, you don't want this piece, let's say this piece over here, to be connected to this piece over here, right? If this piece rotates, you don't want this to hold its rotation because that constraint should no longer keep them together. That's what a soft constraint does. So that's why I needed that thing saying that if this distance over here is greater than 0.2, then break this constraint. That was the complicated part about this, but everything else was fairly straightforward. So then you have your rigid body, and if you want your egg to look like it's connected before it hits the surface, you just do this thing I showed in another video where you RBD connected faces, you time shift to frame 1, copy the attributes over so that it now holds that attribute, RBD disconnected faces, and it fuses them all together. And it's a bunch of things. So then you end up with this egg that falls and shatters, and it sort of holds together. You can see like these pieces over here, these are technically broken, but they're holding together by soft constraints. And that's sort of how an eggshell acts as well. Because it has that membrane. And so, that's just a little extra touch that I added to that. And then finally, the fluid simulation. So let me go through this. This looks very complicated. It's not really. It's just me making an egg in the most complicated way possible. So I needed this egg over here to have some points, right? Varying viscosity. I'm going to be talking about this probably tomorrow. So varying viscosity. This is my viscosity. Maybe black body isn't the best way to show it off. Let's do infrared. So you can see that there's areas of high viscosity and low viscosity that sort of makes it look more like an egg white. You just feed that into a DOP net. Let's flip DOP over here. It's super simple. Once again, I'm only starting my simulation upon impact. 317 is when it starts, so over here. And then I cache it out. So .io over here. You can see that I have particles. Let me just take a look at it. So you just have a bunch of particles, splat. And you can take a look at the viscosity at this point as well. It's kind of cool to look at it. You can see that there's different areas of viscosity. You can use this to texture, which is awesome. So then you take all of this, goes out over here, you VDB combine. That all takes really long. This is like 20 minutes to VDB combine everything. But what it gives you is this egg white and an egg yolk coating, and the coating of the actual, whatever this is, stone. And so you have that egg that sort of spreads out over time. You just give it a material and a color. Cool. That's all there is to it. I say that like there's not a million things to this, but that's what makes up this effect. So 3 sort of dynamic networks, and the important thing is they're not two-way interactions, right? That's an important distinction to make, because you might be thinking, this yolk should kind of get pushed by the white. But the best way to do it is to look at it and say, okay, this shell needs to affect the yolk. The yolk, maybe I can get away without it affecting the shell. So that's one way, right? This affects the yolk. And then you can say, okay, I need the yolk and the white to interact, but does the white really affect the yolk? Can I get away without it? You say, right, I can. So I don't need to do two-way interaction between that. I can just do vellum and a fluid. Done. But yeah, before this video gets way out of hand, that's all there is to it. Maybe I'll also show you the stone texturing. So I know this looks like a lot. Once again, it's not. I just duplicate a bunch of noises over, mix them together, color correct the egg colors, and bring in that particle attribute, so CD, so that I can fetch all of their colors. And the actual ground is kind of cool. Just a... Oh yeah, go just... If you want like free seamless textures, go to textures.com. They have free textures. If you sign up, you get like 15 credits a day or something. And then you can just, save some textures from them. It's great for a daily challenge like this. Like, I 100% think that you should find a website similar to it or use textures.com. Not sponsored. I don't have any relation to them. They've just been very helpful. I used them last year in Houdini when I just need like some super basic seamless textures to fill something out. So yeah, you have that texture. And what I do here, this is kind of interesting. So you have one texture, right? 3.8 scale. You have another texture, 3.8 scale, but this one's rotated 140. And then you mix it with a noise. So maybe I can show you what this looks like. So let's run Redshift. Let me hide everything quick. Okay, so this ground texture, right? I want to show you a couple of things. You could take this and use it as the ground texture, right? That, but you can kind of see that it's tiled. So what I do is I take it, I rotate it over here, and then mix it with a noise. So then you end up with this, right? So some are going that way, some's going this way, and it's mixed with a noise. So then I take that once again, and I color correct the one version, and I mix it with a noise. So now you have two different color variations as well, right? So now there's some light areas and some dark areas. And I also add a little bit of a noise over here. Wait, where is it? Yeah, this one, just like a little bumpy noise. And then you use that both for the actual texture and for the displacement. So that way you can take seamless textures and remove the look of tiling. But yeah, I spoke a lot. Let me stop there before I get carried away. Hopefully that was kind of interesting for you. You can see the type of things that I do to put out a work. I'll admit, this was probably the most difficult entry I've done. So don't think like this is what I do every single time. I just kind of wanted to push myself again. I could have very much just settled for these rocks and been done in like half an hour, right? Like an hour, yeah, like 45 minutes. But these extra things take time. So, stopping here would have maybe been a winning entry. I don't know. And really, this is super simple. This is just decent texturing and good lighting. That's all there is to it. And so you have maybe a winning entry even without the egg, but it's definitely still a good looking render in my opinion. So yeah, hope this helped you. And I will be seeing you tomorrow, hopefully. Whatever tomorrow's topic is. Mud. No. Yeah, mud. Yeah. See you tomorrow for mud. Okay.